Welcome to Phoenix Masonry Live, a show that brings you talented Freemasons, Masonic authors, artists, craftsmen, and brothers of accomplishment. I am Frederick L. Milliken, Executive Director of Phoenix Masonry, and we are here to celebrate our Freemasonry. That's what we do at Phoenix Masonry. We celebrate our Freemasonry. I'm here today celebrating with Brother Justin Jones of the Grand Lodge of Texas, AF and AM. Welcome to the show, Justin.
Thank you so much for having me, Fred.
Justin Jones is a high school physics teacher in Whitney, Texas, about an hour north of Waco, Texas. He received his entered apprentice degree in August of 2005, his fellowcraft degree in November of 2005, and his Master Mason degree in December of 2005. He served as Worshipful Master for Grandview Masonic Lodge number 266 in 2012, and for Whitney Masonic Lodge number 355 in 2016. He is currently the Tyler and Lodge Education Officer for Whitney. He is a member of Chapter and Council, as well as Commandery. He is a past High Priest and thrice illustrious Master, and has also served as the District Deputy for both of these bodies. Justin is also a moderator on the popular Masonic forum, My Freemasonry. Well, welcome again, Justin.
Thank you so much.
I've been wanting to interview you ever since I started reading your blog and viewing your videos on YouTube. You represent to me, just as Rip Moore, which was the last interview I did, the up-and-coming young Freemason who wants to see that the traditions, the virtues, the knowledge, the esoteric study of Freemasonry does not die. And that is something that a lot of young Masons are really after. That's something they really want, I think.
I would agree with you on that.
So let's discuss some things about you. What brought you to the fraternity?
So, I don't remember, I can't tell you exactly what brought me, but I can tell you that I remember when I was in the Air Force, I was just about to get out, and I was already kind of longing for something else, something that I could belong to. And I remember I was on the phone in my dorm room talking to my dad, and I knew he was a Freemason. I'd always known that. He wasn't active necessarily, but I saw the symbols as a kid, and so I asked around before, and I had already known that he was a member, and we were having this conversation, and I asked him about Freemasonry. And, of course, when your son asks you about Freemasonry, that's something you've been waiting for a long time. And I would also find out that my granddad is a Freemason, which I didn't know that at all. And so that's what really brought me into it. Once I found out about my granddad, it kind of created like this legacy I felt like I needed to continue. And it just all went from there. I eventually got home, and my dad already had all the paperwork for me. So I filled it out, we visited the lodge, and it just, that started my whole journey right there.
So why did you drop out of active participation in Freemasonry, and what brought you back?
So this was back in 2005 when I was going through my degrees. And at the time here in Texas, for those who might not know, there used to be a rule where you couldn't sit in a stated meeting unless you were a Master Mason. And so I went through all the degrees, I learned all the memory work, and there was a lot of expectations, there was a lot of build up to actually being able to sit in a lodge, and I was really excited. And so I went there and I put my apron on and I sat in a lodge, and they opened it, and it was a business meeting. And that's all there was to it. There was they talked about fundraising. And, of course, they did the reading of the minutes, and they, Grand Lodge Communications, and that was all. And that was all there was to it. And I remember my first meeting very well, because it was very disappointing. But I told myself, maybe there was just that one meeting. Maybe my first meeting was just the wrong meeting. But I would quickly find out, not just from sitting in my lodge, but from visiting, that's really all that ever happened was this kind of this mundane activity. And so it was probably in 2006 when we were preparing for that fundraiser, and it was like this huge preparation because we sold barbecue, and so it was this huge undertaking, all hands on deck kind of thing. And I'm just loading waters up on this dolly, and it's just one of those things when you just have like this, when this thought occurs to you, you remember exactly where you are and what you were doing, kind of thing. And I was loading these packets of water on this dolly, and I was like, we're nothing but a service club. That's all we do. We're just like the Lions Club. And so it really disgruntled me, and so I just went inactive, and that's what really drug me out, was just constant disappointment, I guess. I hate to say that, but you go in expecting something marvelous and you're presented with something mundane, every time. So that's what really drug me away.
What brought you back?
My dad kept going. After I joined, he became active again. It was kind of our thing, I guess. And he didn't really, he didn't give up on me. And my granddad didn't either. And so they kept asking me to come back, and I would always, say no. And then, I don't know, it was one day they asked me, and I went ahead and went. And I went home, and I was like, you know what, I'm just going to actually do some research, because something that really struck me odd was, even when I stepped away, what was really strange to me was we have all this history, all this rich history, all this memory work, all these symbols, all this catechism. And I know 300 years ago they didn't come up with all this just to turn around and raise money to give it away. So I started doing the research. I came across Masons of Texas, as it was known at the time, which is now My Freemasonry. And they had a lot of good articles, so I started reading those, and I just started consuming all this information. And there was some really knowledgeable brethren on the forum at the time. They just started talking about these ideas and concepts. And basically it didn't have to be the way it was. And that's what struck me so powerfully. And I started learning about like traditional observance lodges and the way they were doing things, which is kind of, as a young man, that's kind of what I thought Freemasonry was going to be like. And then I stumbled across somewhere, probably on that forum, someone linked me to Laudable Pursuit, which I believe you had a part in that, did you not? Writing that book?
What was the book again?
Laudable Pursuit?
No, I didn't. I didn't really have any input to writing it, but I was around and knew the knew the author, Chris Hodap.
Okay, but that book, I pulled it up at like 10 o'clock at night. I was just going to glance at it, and I remember I just, I could not tear myself away from it. Because it spoke to me in a really powerful way at the time. It was exactly what I needed to read at the right time, and I stayed there and I read the whole thing, and it totally inspired me. It renewed my interest, and so I started going back to lodge again, and I kind of took it upon myself to start seeing what I could do to create these changes in the lodge. And so that's what brought me back, really, was just knowing that it didn't have to be the way it was. And I'm the kind of person, if I see something that I feel is broke, I want to try and fix it. And I know I'm just one guy in this huge fraternity that, I'm sorry to say, is in many ways stuck in certain mentalities, but I'm a glutton for punishment. So that's what brought me back, man. That's why I keep doing what I'm doing.
So you decided then to write a Masonic blog. What brought you to that?
There's a few reasons. First of all, and this is something I think we've all experienced at some point, if you're at lodge and you have a really great conversation going on with a brother, someone will come along and they will totally derail your conversation. And it seems like this always happens. And the other thing, and this is just something I feel is against me, is I'm kind of young and in a district of much older brethren, and I'm not trying to be, I'm not being callous against older brethren. I have a lot of respect for them, but they have more Masonic experience than I do. And so I think when a young man comes into an organization like that, or a lodge like that specifically, and he starts saying, hey, let's do it this way, or let's start, changing it up. You're young, and in their eyes, they've been doing it 50 plus years, and you're some new guy that's been doing it, 5 or 10 years. They're not necessarily going to listen to you, and I've seen that a lot. So I want to get these ideas out without being interrupted or told that that's the way we've always done it. So I just started blogging. I had these things on my heart that I wanted to get out, and at first I just started writing it for myself, just to share it. And if anyone's interested, if it made an impact on anybody, great. But I really just wanted to get these ideas off my chest, and so that's why I started that. I wasn't sure where it was going to go or what I was going to do with it, or really how long it was even going to last. But I've been very humbled. I've had a lot of support on it, so it's one of my passions. I really enjoy doing it.
The title of your Masonic website is Masonic Improvement. So why did you rename it that, and what needs improvement in Masonry?
So when I first started the blog, I just needed a name, and I'm in Texas, so Lone Star Mason. But when I first started writing, I didn't know exactly what I was going to write about, other than it's going to be about Freemasonry. And so I just write what's on my heart, and I had to see what that pattern was going to be. And after about I guess it's already been more than after about a year, I just went back and looked at everything, and the pattern seemed to be Masonic Improvement. And so that's where I went with it. I didn't want something that was just totally focused towards Texas, because I know that Texas problems aren't unique. So I renamed that to Masonic Improvement. What was the other question?
And what needs improvement in Masonry?
Oh, yeah.
That's the title of the blog.
Yeah. Here's the thing, and I'm going to just be very blunt, but I'm going to follow up very quickly. I think everything needs improvement in Freemasonry. And when I say that, I'm not saying like there's anything inherently wrong with Freemasonry, but that everything can always be improved. And the kind of a background on this. So I'm also I teach obviously, but I'm also a certified principal. And when I was going through the courses and everything, and when I was learning all the administration side of education, I was introduced to this concept of continuous improvement. And lots of organizations use this, not just school systems, but you don't really see this in Grand Lodges necessarily, or even in many lodges. We just kind of take things as they are and don't really question that. And so that's why I say everything, because literally every aspect of your lodge can probably be improved in some way, even if you're doing it really well. That's not to say you're doing it badly, but you can always reevaluate and step back and decide, what can we do to make that better? How can we improve that? And not to kind of sidetrack here, but I think that's what's really powerful about the traditional observance movement is if you look at the way they run things, if you actually just kind of sit down and read about how some of the lodges have changed their practices, you can tell that's what they've done. They've reevaluated everything from the opening and closing to the degrees themselves, just even to the meals and the due structures and the clothing. And they said, how can we kick this up a notch? How can we make this better, given what we have, where we're at? And I think that's why it's so appealing to a lot, especially the younger brethren, is because that's what they're doing. And I think that's a very powerful technique that we need to start adopting.
So you started in writing a Masonic blog, and then you have been producing Masonic videos.
Mm-hmm.
Tell me about that and why you decided to do that too.
So I really enjoy blogging, but as kind of an experiment, I made a video and I posted it, and it was really scary. It's a new experience. You're really throwing yourself out there. When you're writing a blog, you're hiding behind the words. No one knows who you are. They don't see your face. They can't. They don't know all the mistakes you make as you're talking or as you're typing. So throwing yourself out on the video, it was really a scary experience, but I found that I really like it, and I found that it appeals to a whole other audience than those that would traditionally just read blogs. Now, I'm not saying brothers won't watch videos and read blogs. I certainly do, but I reached a whole another audience with videos, and I think that's really powerful. I usually always put a link to some relevant post on my blog and my videos anyway, so they're very closely interconnected. But I've gotten kind of addicted to videos. I've gotten to where I'm producing way more videos than I do actual blog posts. I'll still do those for like the Improving Large Culture series I'm working on. That didn't really translate so well to a video because it can be kind of long-winded. But so there's definitely a place for blogs, but I think videos are great because you can reach out in new ways, like we're doing right now, to brethren that might otherwise not be inclined to read a blog post.
Sort of covering all your bases, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Well, you say that in this process of improvement, that creating vision and goals enters into this Masonic improvement. So explain to all of us how important that is and your feelings on that subject.
If you don't have a standard to measure your progress against, you don't know how successful you're being. And going back to looking at other organizations again, if you look at the most successful corporations and organizations, that's what they do. They have goals every year. They have a vision for their company. They also have something called a mission statement, which I feel is very closely tied as well. And if you don't have these things, how do you know how well your programs are working? Because you don't know really what you're trying to achieve. You may say, well, we want to do a fundraiser to raise X amount of money, but why? And I know you didn't really ask about mission statements, but do you mind if I go ahead and cover that, because they're kind of tied together?
Go ahead.
Okay. So if a vision is where you're going, the goals are just kind of the guidepost along the way that kind of tell you if you're on track. But your vision statement, your mission statement, is your why. It's why are you doing everything? And I made a video about this. I was really inspired by something I watched by Simon Sinek. Did you watch that video, The Importance of Why?
I've heard of it. I don't think I've seen it in a long time.
Okay. Yeah, so I watched a video. It was a TED Talk, and he talked about the importance of why for organizations. And that really ties back to the mission statement. Your mission statement is your why, and if you don't have that, then you don't know really why you're doing anything with your lodge.
Right. So how do you decide what to write about or to make a video about? What subjects? How do you pick the subjects?
At first, it was really just what was on my heart. Like I said, whatever I've been kind of thinking about for a long time, I just started typing. And I know really great writers have a process. They type it and they proofread and they might get someone else to read it and everything. I would just type it and read it over, and it was very, very basic, very fundamental. But over time, I still have lots of things on my heart that I want to talk about, but it was really just what was inspiring me at the time. So I'm on all these different media outlets like Facebook and My Freemasonry, and there's a Reddit subforum for Freemasonry. And you'll hear about like Masonic news, or people ask questions, or just whatever issues coming up. And some of my videos and some of my posts have been a direct result of that. And if it, like the whole mess going on over in England not long ago with the what was that, the Guardian. So I made that my video, don't feed the trolls kind of, and that was a direct result of that, just because I felt like it was something that I wanted to address, and so that's where I went with that. So to answer your question, I mean, there's a wide range of things that might inspire me to do either a video or a blog. It just depends, I guess.
I'm interested in your blog motto and why you chose ex nihilo nihil fit. And tell us what it means.
Basically, it means from nothing comes nothing, and and for such a long time, Grand Lodges have been. I'm not really. I know it sounds like I'm trash talking Grand Lodges, but I'm not. But even lodges themselves, they do nothing and hope that something changes. We've all seen lodges that are meeting just for the purpose of having enough meetings to keep their charter, and it's like, why are you're not doing anything. Why are you holding on to your charter if are you expecting something magical to just happen out of nothing? And that's kind of what the point of the motto was, but also it has a kind of an inverse meaning. That is, from nothing comes nothing, but if you do stuff, if you do something, things will begin to change. And that's really kind of the dual meaning behind that. You have your very obvious meaning, and then the more not outright, but it's there, meaning that you need to actually start creating change if you want change.
And that leads us right into a subject that's near and dear to your heart, I know, because having read and watched your videos, and that's Masonic education and how important it is to the life of our fraternity. So say a few words about that.
Masonic education is, in my opinion, I feel is vital, and it's so often it's neglected. And in many lodges, when it is adopted, it's a Tyler talk or something, handed down by Grand Lodge that the reader probably hasn't seen, 5 minutes prior to it being handed to him, and it's very uninspired. It's not motivational at all. But Masonic education, that is education, things that you actually care about that are from your heart, are so important to our fraternity. And I feel if we want to create any kind of positive changes for our fraternity, education is the way to go. And as a teacher, I know that the future of our country depends on education, at a public level. And so education at large, the future of the fraternity depends on education at a large level. And I know we'll talk later probably about culture and everything, but you can't hope to change the culture of your lodge if you don't have some kind of prior understanding of what you're doing, and you have to create that through education.
Well, that's the next subject I want to get into, because I say let's talk lodge culture, because you wrote a 3-part series on it, and I have a number of quotes from you. Periodically, I'm going to throw a quote in and say, okay, tell us about what you mean by this. So let's lead off one with now about lodge culture. How does "that's not how we always have done it" enter into lodge culture?
So that should be, if you're culturally minded, like if you're trying to actively influence the culture of your lodge, if you hear that being said, that should be a red flag right there, because the brother's saying it, but it's the culture of that lodge speaking. So if you want to, for example, kick up the dress a notch, and the brother's like, well, that's not the way we've always done it, that's the culture of your lodge speaking right there. And here in Texas, we're also subdivided into districts. And so, like, if you get a visiting brother, and we get that a lot in my district. My district's very close, so you usually see brethren at pretty much every meeting. And if you suggest something and they say, well, that's not the way we do it in my lodge, that's your district culture speaking right there. And culture is a powerful force, and I'm sure you'll ask me a follow-up question about this, but that could be a good thing or a bad thing. The way we've always done things, it doesn't necessarily mean from the beginning of the lodge itself, but it could just be recently, the way we've always done things recently, and so that can be a good thing. But if you have that mindset where you're trying to watch out for indicators of your lodge culture, that's definitely a giveaway right there.
So what is the difference between changing a lodge's climate and changing its culture?
So a climate is pretty easy to change. It doesn't really take a long time to change climate. So say, for example, you have a really healthy lodge. The brethren are all very close. They have great meals. but it's here in Texas, and it's June, and just before the lodge opens, the AC goes out, right? So these brethren, they love each other to death, but give them 15 or 20 minutes, and they're going to start to become irritable. They're going to become frustrated because it gets hot, and that's. I mean, obviously, we're talking about a literal climate change here, but the lodge climate itself is also going to change. And if you're a visitor from the outside looking in, and you walk in halfway through the meeting, and you sit there and you notice that everybody is irritable and grumpy, that's your first impression. That's your first impression. That's what you think about that lodge. But that's not necessarily an indicator of how the lodge actually is, right? So that's a example of culture. Culture changes very quickly. If they get the AC fixed, then next time you come back, it's going to be, everybody's going to be terrific.
You mean climate, don't you? Climate changes very quickly?
Yes, I'm sorry. Yeah, the climate changes.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, say they never fix that AC, and over time, everybody is constantly frustrated. Every meeting it's hot and sweaty, and everybody's grumpy. Then that constant climate is going to affect the culture, and eventually you're going to notice, even when winter comes around, that everybody is just kind of irritable when it comes to lodge meetings, because they have this mentality that lodge meetings are miserable. And so climate can affect culture over time, but it takes a long time, and climate, like I said, is pretty quick and easy to change. Culture, however, is much more difficult. It's like this massive thing. It takes a great amount of focused effort to move, but once you get it to where you want it, it's there, and that could be a good or a bad thing. If you have good aspects of your culture, it's going to be hard for someone to come in and wreck that. But on the other hand, if you have bad aspects of your culture, then you have to devote quite a bit of time to that, and it can't just be you. It has to be you and the majority of the lodge working together to make that happen, or it's just not going to happen.
Well, as a further example of what you're talking about, tell us the story of your first lodge and how you thought you had changed the lodge culture.
So, like I told you, when I was going to the meetings, it was all about fundraising. It was a fundraising lodge, and I set out to change that. Young and naive. So I got active again. I started going through the chairs, and my main tool to create change was education. Like I said earlier, I would talk one-on-one with brethren. When they would let me, I'd read papers. Many of them I pulled off the Texas Freemasons of Texas website, and I would just share those in the lodge. And over time, these new ideas started kind of creating this shift in the lodge itself, at least with the active members. Some of the changes, we really started working on our ritual. We started trying to improve our ritual. It got really good for a certain amount of time. We really started reevaluating our due structures. Not well enough, but some of these things take time. And the lodge building itself, we made a huge amount of improvements to. When I first joined, a lot of people just thought that building was a warehouse. It's downtown in the middle of the, well, I'll say the city, but it's two highways that go through it, and that's downtown. And so we made the outside look much nicer. We totally gutted the lodge building and like the little dining room we had, and because it had not been changed since it was built like in the 60s. And like the lodge room itself was just a square box with a linoleum tile floor. And so we brought in carpet. We put carpet around there. We did the checkered pavement around the altar. We built a little secretary's office. We totally changed the counter. We painted. We did all kinds of wonderful things. We started a library, and the whole time, it wasn't just me, but several of the brethren, we were pushing for this. And then after I was done in the East, I think that was probably 2013. I had just finished my bachelor's. I had just finished my teaching certification, and I had a job, and it was time to move away. And as a first year teacher, basically that year is just gone because you are so busy trying to learn, you're trying to keep up with everything. I totally lost track. I lost touch with the brethren at my old lodge. I eventually just transferred my membership, and when I did follow up, actually what prompted me was I was visiting a local lodge, and my old lodge came up. And this local lodge is kind of between where I live now and my old one. And I told them where my old lodge was, and the brethren were like, "Oh, I heard some kind of bad things about that lodge." And I was like, "Well, what are you talking about? It was really good shape when I left it." And so I started following up on that, and sure enough, after I left, several other brethren, things come up, things happen, and they had to move off, or they went inactive for whatever reason, and it was pretty much business as usual after that. The lodge, like I said, it had a very strong fundraising culture. That was something I was striving to subdue, because I don't necessarily feel that that's something we need to do, but it never went away completely. And so when I was gone and some of the other brethren left, there was really no voice saying that we shouldn't be doing that. And it just went back to what it was. I mean, it was a very strong pre-existing culture, and several of the brethren didn't know anything else, and that's what happened.
So you changed the climate of the lodge while you were there,
Yes,
and going through the chairs and as worshipful master, but you didn't end up changing the culture of the lodge, right?
that's correct. The climate changed, and we managed to maintain it long enough that we thought it was cultural. And keep in mind that we didn't know about climate culture at the time. We were just trying to make these changes. But looking back, we saw the climate change, and we thought it was going to be long lasting. We thought it was going to be a long lasting cultural change, but that was not the case.
Yeah, yeah. So there's a lot of other factors you talk about in lodge culture. Let's go over mission and vision, humor, rituals and ceremonies, norms, symbols, and values. That's kind of a big question. Let's break them down individually. And you want to say anything more about mission and vision, or have we covered that?
I feel that we covered it pretty well, other than just the fact that the mission and vision and the mission statements are what kind of guide that culture.
Mm-hmm. Okay, humor.
I had a story about this. I visited a local lodge last month, and the lodge is in good shape. The reason they're meeting is because they're considering merging with ours. But they also meet in the same building as ours. And keep in mind that this is a town of like 1,200 people, so it's not a very big community. But I saw brethren that I'd never seen attend any other lodge before. So I mean, they live in the area, but they don't come to my lodge. They come to this lodge. And as I was sitting there and they're about to open, I mean, they were joking. They were close with one another, and it was a totally different fraternal climate than we have at my lodge. And I'm sitting there and I was like, this is really healthy aspect. Obviously the lodge has other problems, but as far as that part of the culture goes, I mean, they're very strong. And I mean, I wish you could just pick that up and transfer it to my lodge. But so that's a good example, I think, of how humor can really shape your lodge. I mean, they were very close, and there were a few tears shed that night, and they didn't mind doing that. But my lodge is much more serious than that.
Mm. Okay, rituals and ceremonies. How does that affect lodge culture?
I think the ritual and ceremonies are almost more of a reflection of your lodge culture, because based off the book I was reading, they were talking about just from organizational standards, what kind of rituals the organization has. But from a Masonic standard, we have actual legitimate rituals, we have legitimate ceremonies, and for the most part, they are, or they should be, very common, across all lodges here in Texas. But if you as you start visiting degrees and everything, you'll notice, or even just lodges with the opening and closing, you'll notice that the lodges handle things differently. I have sat in degrees where the people conferring degrees didn't know their parts, where they would joke, where the people on the sidelines would make comments, and I've sat in degrees where everybody knew their work spot on. Uh, nobody, nobody talked unless you're supposed to, and they took it very seriously. And that's a reflection of the lodge culture, I think, because that tells you how important that is to that lodge. And you'll see this also with opening and closing, where they'll short form it, or they'll just gavel real quickly, or sound like bam 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 kind of thing. And but I've also seen it where it's taken more slowly, and everybody knows the work. And if you take the importance of the work itself seriously, then that will reflect in the work itself that you do. And that comes from the culture of your lodge. If your lodge takes this seriously and it stresses that these are important, you only get one EA, you only get one fellowcraft, you only get one masters. Let's make it meaningful and have an impact on the person versus let's just get this done so they can pay dues.
Well, tell us what you mean by norms. What is this all about?
A norm. Geez, a norm is it's just kind of how's the best way to put this? A norm is what it is. So like an example in my or a lodge I've been to, they might have a norm where flip-flops and sandals is completely acceptable, and I've seen that. Or you might have a norm where the senior deacon is responsible for providing the meals. And so these are kind of the manifestations of the culture itself. Hold on, I have to cough real quick. And they could be a good or a bad thing. It's you want to encourage norms that align with the culture you're aiming for, and you need to find a way to discourage those norms that are harmful to that culture or to the lodge itself.
Okay. And lastly, you mentioned in your, like I say, it's a three-part blog series, symbols and values.
Mm-hmm.
Tell us how this enters into lodge culture.
This enters into culture in very prominent way here in Freemasonry. Now, again, this was taken from a book that was talking about other organizations. So organizations may have their culture and values, but we have it. It's very obvious. It's in your face, especially if you're paying attention to the degrees as you go through it, because in several cases we outright tell you, these are our symbols, this is what it represents, these are our values, and this is what your values should be as a Mason. And whether or not we really stressed it or not is also a reflection of our lodge culture. If we just treat it as though it's something to be memorized, it's part of the catechism, and once you have it done, once you turn it in, good for you, then you're really doing that a disservice. But if a lodge is really stressing on learn those symbols, learn how to apply that to your life, then that's a totally different manifestation of a lodge culture. That's a lodge culture that's trying to take that one step further and actually do something crazy, which is create a better man, rather than just a man who can memorize something and forget about it in many cases.
Uh-huh. Well, discuss this quote that I picked out. The role of culture is to manage the lodge, not to relieve anybody of leadership.
Okay, so the lodge culture, like I said before, when you have that quote, that's not the way we've always done things, and that could be a good or a bad thing, right? So say like a worship master, and many of us have probably seen a worship master that thought they could do something like this. Say you have a worship master, and he opens a lodge, and he decides that we need to start dressing nice. And so he says, this is my decree. From now on, the next meeting, everybody needs to have a tuxedo, right? Depending on your pre-existing lodge culture, that either you're going to get a revolt on your hands, or you're going to have nobody turn up at your lodge. And that's because you can't create something out of nothing. And so the lodge culture will actually dictate certain things. So this worship master in this case, he came from a lodge culture where it was just kind of casual. But if you have a culture where people, I don't know, already wear suits, then they're going to be wearing those suits and everything like that. The worship master, they control the flow of business, they control the lodge, and I firmly believe that a good worship master will create a very good year for your lodge, and a bad worship master can completely, and I've seen this, completely undo years of hard work in your lodge. And so the worship master has a very important role of ruling the lodge itself, but the culture is what manages the lodge, because it's where those norms come from. And so like the standard of the food, the due structures, what you do besides just having a steady meeting, the education, those are all norms, and that's managed more by the culture itself. And so a worship master can have impact on these things, but if he tries to do something that totally contrasts with the culture in an extreme way, it's not going to work.
Yeah, what I'm hearing here is that the culture itself can't be changed immediately. It has to be changed over a period of time, and worshipful masters and other lodge leaders would be better off if they didn't try to drastic changes that tried to change the lodge culture overnight. Is that where we're at?
Yeah, culture isn't something that a worship master can just wrestle into submission. It takes a concentrated effort, and this is kind of why it's important, in my opinion, that if you're going to follow the progressive line, it's important that the wardens are on the same page as you with a lot of things. And you see this often at Grand Lodges where every time you get a new Grand Master, it's a new set of ideas, a new set of mandates, a new set of programs, and you can't change a culture within 1 year. So everything that they did the year before, unless it's a continuation of the previous year, is going to be thrown out the window, and that applies to lodges as well.
Well, one of the answers to that is to have longer terms, a 2-year line, or a master that serves 2, 3, 4 years. How do you feel about that, and have you experienced that in Texas Freemasonry?
I made a video about that, and I got some kind of flack on it because I guess the brother thought that I was a worship master, and I felt I should be in there another year. But so before I really get into that, for the record, I'm a Tyler, and I'm happy being a Tyler. I don't really want to go to the East anytime soon, but we do have a worship master right now, and I strongly encourage him to stay in the East another year. And I know that there's this feeling that something's not right with your lodge if you have to keep someone an extra year, or if you're using past masters in your line. And I don't think that's the case. If you look at like a organization, say like I don't want to use any names, I guess, but like a multi-billion-dollar corporation, and they change their vice president and their CEO every year. Imagine what that would do to their stocks, especially if it was a good vice president or a good CEO. But we do that with our fraternity every year. And so we might have a great worship master. He has great programs. The lodge is doing wonderful. There's growth taking place, but his year's up. So sorry. The next guy coming in line, it's his turn. And you see this at the Grand Lodge also. And there've been great grandmasters, and there's been less than stellar. But that applies to everything. So I think keeping somebody more than 1 year is totally fine, as long as they are doing a great job, as long as they aren't too burned out to do it again. Because sitting in the East is very tiring. But if they're enjoying it, if they're willing to do it again, and if the lodge wants to keep them, why would you get rid of somebody who's doing a good job? That's I think the progressive line is another one of those things that we just kind of take for what it is, and we really should not. We just assume that senior one steps up every year, but they shouldn't necessarily do that. And I've seen brethren get mad. I had a brother confront me in a lodge as soon as we closed, because we didn't feel that he was ready to move on. But you can't just push people through, regardless of their leadership qualities, because that is so detrimental to your lodge and the fraternity as a whole.
And before we leave lodge culture, this last quote, which I found very interesting. You said, while culture shapes behaviors, the opposite can be true as well. Tell us about it.
So the culture can shape the behavior, and what I mean by that is it can shape a good behavior, but it can also wreck a good behavior, depending on what your culture is. And this can apply on so many levels. I mean, if you look at like an individual Mason, and they may have a behavior that's really desirable, but he unknowingly or for whatever reason he's a member of a lodge that discourages that behavior. It's going to dissipate over time. It's going to be less noticeable. And the same thing applies to, you can say that about a lodge. If a lodge has a certain behavior that's really good, and that could be, a matter of opinion, but if you have a lodge that has a really good behavior, and that culture, for whatever reason, is not conducive to that, then you're going to lose it. But then again, if you want to encourage a good behavior, you can create that. You can start trying to make that a norm in your lodge, and you can actually encourage and create that as well.
I said we were leaving culture, but one more question. I don't know if this is a good question or you can answer it, but what is the ideal lodge culture? Is there one? Maybe there isn't. Do you think one size fits all is a bad concept?
And that's kind of why I'm kind of hesitating, but it's a very good question. And the thing is, no, one size doesn't fit all in my opinion. What may work really well in Fort Worth, won't necessarily work well in rural Texas. So I know like there are traditional observance lodges, which I guess I'll go ahead and say I think traditional observance lodges are they are kind of the manifestation of people striving for an ideal lodge in that area. But I know there's traditional observance lodges where you wear tux if you're a member and you show up in your tuxedo. But here in rural Texas, that might be ideal for them. But here in rural Texas, if you suggest something like that, it won't fly. I think continuous improvement can create the ideal lodge for your area. But what might be an ideal lodge in Wheaton, Texas, might not necessarily look like an ideal lodge in like Fort Worth or Houston or New York or San Francisco. But I think there are certain aspects of a lodge that you'll notice uniformly. What's the word? What am I trying to say here? You'll notice that they are different than other lodges around them if they're trying to strive for an ideal lodge. And if you want to go ahead and go into that, but so like I think an ideal lodge will have higher dues than what you typically see now. An ideal lodge will strive for better dress codes. It will strive for better meals, a better ritual, and there's probably several more components to that. And then again, like I said, they won't necessarily look the same across the board, but when you look at other lodges around them that are not striving to be ideal, you'll notice a huge difference.
Mm-hmm. One of the things that you said that I really loved was you believe that each one of us is capable of doing great things in our fraternity. You want to say anything about that?
There's a quote. I think it's by Gandhi, and but it's be the change you want to see. And if I'm wrong about who said that, I'm sorry. But we all have that ability, and not just in our lodge, but just in our communities and just life in general. One person has a huge amount of power to create change, And if you don't believe that, look at a lodge where you had one bad person join, and I hate to say one bad person, but we do that. We do allow people we shouldn't allow in. And you see one bad apple join a lodge, and think about what happens to that lodge afterwards. So if one person has that much power to destroy a lodge, why would one person not have that much power to improve a lodge? And this could apply all the way up. You can apply it to even a grand level or even a national level. It's just a matter of your persistence.
Justin, discuss what you got out of the book Millennial Apprentices, The Next Revolution in Freemasonry.
I got that basically I wasn't the only one, and I kind of had that feeling from other conversations in the past, but the book really hit home. And what was interesting, I think, is that I think he was from New York, and so he had a different, and you could tell from the way he wrote that he had a different kind of philosophy on several things, and not necessarily Masonically, but even politically. And it just really struck me as beautiful that you can have completely different outlooks on life like that, and still see that certain things need to change in the fraternity, and that's very unifying, because many of the things that he talked about, I talked about. He had the same. He was discouraged just like I was initially, and he found something that really spoke out to him, and it got him involved again as well. So, and I, when I made my last video, the one about why I left Freemasonry, something I noticed was that a lot of brethren, kind of on the same boat as me and that author, we joined and we left. And so it's very unifying in that you have all these younger men. Technically, I'm a millennial, so you have all these millennials that are joining, and almost for the same reasons, and leaving for almost the same reasons.
Right. Explain the power of committees in lodge. This is something we touch on.
So one man can't do everything, and you'll often see a worshipful master that does that. And I think committees are a very important leadership skill. And I've seen good worshipful masters that have done this. I'm not saying that you're a bad worshipful master if you don't use committees, but you can be so much more effective if you use committees wisely. Your year in the East will be so much less exhausting if you learn to rely on your brethren. We are all here together. We are all here for hopefully the same purpose. We all have the same goals. So let's all work together towards those goals. You can't be expected to research every little thing that your lodge wants to do. You can't be expected to present everything you want your lodge to do. You can't be expected to actually run every program that you want your lodge to do. That's why you use the power of committees. Other organizations do it. And I think one of the common themes, I keep referring to other organizations. Freemasonry is an organization, and we are unique, but fundamentally we are an organization. The same rules that apply to other organizations can apply to us, and committees are huge aspects of multinational corporations, of other fraternal organizations. There's no reason we shouldn't be able to use them as well.
I gathered that Stephen Covey inspires you.
Yes, and actually, one of my first presentations I made for my lodge was inspired by. I totally forgot the title of the book. What is it? 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And I was working on a series of presentations, 7 Habits of Highly Effective Freemasons. I may come back one day and actually write about that and translate that to my blog. But yes, I mean, if you look at like Covey's books, he talks about keeping things within your cable toe. Knowing that certain things you can't change, certain things you can. And so that applied, that I felt that resonated with me very strongly. And I do that a lot. I'll read a book that has nothing to do with Freemasonry, but mentally, as I'm reading it, I'm like, that applies to kind of that symbol, or that applies to something we do at our lodge. That's what inspired the whole the cultural series I made. So yes, I love Covey. I need to reread them actually, but I encourage anyone to grab a copy of that book, because even though he doesn't outright say, as a Freemason, these are how things should apply to us. As a Freemason, it really spoke out to me in that way.
Uh-huh. Well, my favorite blog post of yours is the lesson of the garden club. I just thought it was great. Talk a little bit about it.
So you have this club, right? And it's a garden club, and you get this new guy that wants to join, and they're really excited about this. But this is a very unique garden club. You have certain levels you have to attain as you go through, and there's a certain amount of work you have to go through. And so the first level is just about learning how to till that soil. And there's memory work, which is kind of weird for a gardening club, but okay. And so you learn about tilling. You don't actually do any tilling, but you learn about the concept of tilling, and you present that to the brethren, or the members, I guess, and they're like, great, you ready to move on. And so the next lesson is about planting the seeds. And so you learn about planting seeds. You don't, again, actually plant any seeds, but you learn the work. And you kind of by now you're kind of wondering, why am I learning all about all these things if I'm not actually doing any of these things? But the brethren, like, it's okay, as long as you learn them work, you're fine. And so you turn in that work, and you're ready for like the master gardener level, and this is where you actually learn about watering and harvesting your crops. Again, you don't do any of the work, but you have memory work associated with it, so you complete that. And everyone's like, congratulations, that's great. And you're like, well, what do I do now? And the members are like, well, you get as much out of gardening as you put into it, but we're not going to do any actual gardening here. And so you go to a few meetings, it's just a business meeting. No one talks about gardening or anything like that. It just keeps going. They do fundraising, which is great. They raise money and give it away, but there's no gardening taking place. And this, obviously, it's a parallel for Freemasonry, what we do, because in my opinion, the EA is about preparing yourself to learn new stuff. So the first level of the gardening club is about tilling the soil. Well, in EA, as an EA, we're tilling our minds and our souls. We're preparing ourselves. We are in, and I'm not going to go into detail about the lessons of the EA, but basically you're making yourself ready to receive the fellowcraft lessons, right? And so you learn that work, and then you move on to the fellowcraft degree, or the second level in the gardening club, which again has the same parallels. You're planting those seeds. Well, in fellowcraft, you're given the seeds. You're told what the seeds are. The liberal arts. And all these things. These are your seeds, but you're not actually expected to plant any seeds in either organization. You're expected to learn what they are for the memory work in Freemasonry, but they don't actually advance you regardless if you actually learn any of the liberal arts or apply any of that to yourself. You just have to learn the catechism. And again, the third level in the gardening club is the same idea. It's about reaping what you sow now. But as Master Masons, we have never planted anything as fellowcrafts to sow in many cases. And so it's all very basic. It's at a very basic level. You're just memorizing things, but you're not actually applying. You're not actually doing masonry in many lodges. In a gardening club, you're not doing any gardening. And just like what happened with me, I'll sit through several steady meetings and realize that there's no actual Freemasonry going on, and I get disgruntled and leave. And that's what happens to so many brethren. So that's really the gardening club. That's it in all of its glory right there. It's basically just and you might read the gardening club and you're like, well, why would anyone stay in that? That sounds so terrible. Why would you join a gardening club where you don't do anything to do with gardening? It's just it gives lip service to gardening, but there's no gardening taking place. But on the same token, look at Freemasonry. That's what we do all the time in our local lodges.
And what you talk about, I've had John Nagy on the show, Coach Nagy.
Yeah.
Uh, he says a lot of the same things that you're saying.
He,
And
he's, oh,
and Brother Rick Moore, when I just finished interviewing him last time, he talks about, creating a successful lodge and how to put together a lodge with harmony and how to put together a lodge that grows. Now, there's a quote from you. It follows right along with what Rick Moore was talking about. I got to pick up the paper. This is a long quote.
okay.
But I think it gets back to the theme of how do you make a successful lodge? How do you grow your lodge? How do you all get along together? And how do you accomplish things rather than just sit around and, like you say, do business meetings, boring business meetings? So how do you do this process? And so there's a quote I picked up from your blog somewhere, and I'm going to run it by you and we're going to talk about it. And the quote is, continuous improvement requires buy-in from the majority of the stakeholders, a goal to strive for, and a way to measure progress. In our organization, we often see leaders making important decisions with no buy-in from the membership, and goals are often general or non-existent. Let's talk about that.
That's almost a loaded question right there. Oh geez, I don't. So,
you don't know where to start with that one, right?
There's so much to it.
Yeah.
I'm just going to start with one thing, and this is something that's always bothered me, and this ties into this, I think, because you see Grand Lodges telling everybody what my generation wants out of fraternity, and making decisions based off what they tell us we want. But if there's any millennial brethren that have actually watched this, that have actually seen any kind of a survey issued by their Grand Lodge, or asked directly by a Grand Lodge officer, please let me know, because I have never been asked, and I know I just represent a small percentage of that, but of the millennials, but I have never encountered another brother in my age that has been asked what they want out of the fraternity, yet we're being told what we want, and decisions are being made based off, assumptions of what we want, to the detriment of our fraternity. And to back off that a little bit and go to a local level, we've all seen worship masters that are less like servant leaders, which I feel a worship master should be doing, leading as a servant for the lodge, and they're more like dictators. And you can't do that. You can't create any kind of change by just issuing decrees. You need feedback from your brethren. You need to know what the brethren want to do, what the lodge wants to do, because if they're not sold on an idea, then it's just you doing everything, and you can't do everything. Like I said, you can't do it all by yourself. And I had another point. Let me think. So you can't just make decrees like that and get things done. And when I going back to that quote, when you're talking about the stakeholders, when I say stakeholders, I'm not referring to all members of your lodge. And this is probably kind of a radical idea, but if you want to be a stakeholder in your lodge, if you want to actually make decisions that impact your lodge, you need to be active in your lodge. So if you never attend, then really why does what you want to do really, it's going to sound terrible, but why does what you want to do really matter if you're never there? And so that's why I say get all the stakeholders together, and the stakeholders are people that are active in your lodge. And I'm not saying this like get a clique together, get a small group of people and conspire to change your lodge. I'm saying do an all call and tell everybody, make it obvious. We're going to have a meeting. We're going to talk about the future of our lodge, and sure enough, your stakeholders will be the ones that show up. But if you just keep twiddling your thumbs and waiting on the majority of the membership of your lodge to actually show up, you're never going to get anything done, because they never come anyway. Fred, that lodge I was telling you about that was talking about merging the other day, that was a called meeting, and they let everybody. It wasn't a called meeting. I'm sorry. It it was a study meeting, but they let everybody know. They sent letters to all the brethren that were members. They sent them emails, phone calls were made, text messages were made, and yet only like I think it was like 4 or 5 of their membership actually showed up. So visitors are still filling the offices. Those are your stakeholders. Regardless of how many active members you actually have, regardless of how many members you actually have, it's the active membership that's your stakeholders, and those are the people that need to be making decisions for the future of your lodge, because they're the ones that are investing their time and their energy into that.
So, as Worshipful Master, 2 different lodges. Have you ever taken an actual survey or written survey or a verbal survey of all of your stakeholders?
Let me think. My first lodge when I was a Worshipful Master, we sent out a survey with the dues that year, and I didn't have the online presence that I do now. I wasn't really familiar with all the options we had available. I don't even know Google Forms was an option back then, but like Google Forms is great for things like this. So I did a survey, got a very small amount of feedback, but the thing is, those people weren't necessarily stakeholders. These were people that never showed up, and because the questions on the survey were like, basically, why do you not come? And most of them didn't care enough to even tell us why they didn't come. But so the last lodge I was a Worshipful Master of, though, I did call a meeting, and it wasn't like a called meeting necessarily. It was more like a informal kind of a business meeting, and that's when the stakeholders showed up. We sat in the common the dining room, and it wasn't an official meeting, but we got there. I had a dry erase board, and I just lined everything out, and I was like, we need to come up with a vision. We need to have a mission statement. We need to talk about what we want to do with our lodge. And this is where it was kind of hard for me, because as a young man, as a millennial, I have certain things I feel a lodge should or should not do. But I also recognize that I'm in rural Texas, where I'm a minority, in that I am young and I have ideas that are kind of different. And so I had to kind of put my feelings aside, and so we ended up, the brethren felt really strongly about the financial problem. They didn't want to talk about dues, but they felt really strongly about the financial problem. So we came up with some decisions. We started doing the traditional Masonic pancake breakfast, and we went from there. But what was important is that the majority of the stakeholders were all on board with this, and from there you can start to create the changes where you can start to get away maybe from the fundraising aspect. But it's one of those things you can't change overnight. You can't just say we're not going to not do pancake breakfast, we're going to raise our dues, and that's going to fix everything, because they don't have that prior knowledge, that prior understanding that you benefit from when you have that kind of Masonic education, because it just hadn't been pushed enough yet. So that's probably the most recent example of when we got the stakeholders together like that.
So tell us your feeling about Masonic dues.
They're too low. they're across the board. Let's see.
That's why we have fundraisers, right? Because of dues.
Right. Isn't that right? the current lodge I'm a member of, the dues across the board was $75 for everything. So $75 a year, $75 for every degree, and it made it easy to remember. So, but we still found ourselves raising money to give it away. Many of the brethren are still to this day frustrated, because they feel that you need to have fundraising, but the support's not there, both in the community and in the lodge itself. So the current worship, some of the brethren, they're just, it's not just this lodge, it was the lodge that I was a member of before too. It was a few people doing everything, and you see that with fundraising, because nobody likes to do fundraising, and but we do it. And what's really interesting about dues, I think, is no one wants to pay it, but there's a brother in my town who he has a karate studio. It's like $50 a month to take karate lessons. $50 a month. So that's pretty substantial by the end of the year. I know that there are people that pay easily $100 a month for satellite and dish. So that's $1,200 a year right there. But Freemasonry isn't important enough to them to pay $100 or $200, and that says a lot. I think there's kind of a two-sided thing to dues. You have to start. If say for example I'm taking karate, I'm getting something very noticeable from that. You know, I'm actually learning something every time I go. I'm coming away with something, right? If I'm paying for satellite, I get something every time I turn on the TV. If you want to charge more for dues, you have to provide something every time they come to lodge. You know, you can't just raise dues to $200 and say, you know, but we're just going to keep reading minutes and sharing Grand Lodge communication and talking about, you know, fundraising, and I think people are still going to pay for that. So you have to have the content, and so it's two-sided kind of thing. You have to, and it falls on us to provide that, but the dues are just way too low. And I don't feel that we need to focus as much as we do on fundraising. Like I said, it drove me away, and I know it does other brothers as well. We come to do Freemasonry, not fundraising. And truth be told, if you're just raising money, like the barbecue sales that my old lodge did, and just turning around and giving that away and saying, look at all the money we donated. Well, no, you didn't really donate it. You took other people's money and turned around, you know, and gave it away. That's not, in my opinion, that's not charity. Charity is giving of yourself. Charity is something that can be uncomfortable to do. You know, if I have $10 in my wallet and I get someone $5, I feel that. I feel that in my wallet, and I feel that here. You know, it's hard. That's charity. Just turning around and giving away money and saying, you know, now we can keep our doors open another year and, you know, give people all this money. It's not charity. It's dishonest in my opinion.
What is this Memento Mori all about? Tell us what it means, what it is.
Oh, we can't talk about Memento Mori. It's scary. I don't want to scare anybody. So Memento Mori, there's different ways you can kind of translate it, but I think basically it's like remember death. And it's just, and this is like, it's nothing new. It's just something we don't talk about. I mean, but that's one of the whole lessons of one of the degrees, you know, understanding that one day you're going to die, and everything that you had going on at that point is done, and all you have left to your name is what you've accomplished. And we need to keep that in mind as Masons. And I think Memento Mori is very powerful because, you know, how are you using your time? You could, I mean, any one of us, tomorrow could be our last day, today could be our last day. Something could happen, you know, drastic, and we're gone. And all you have left is whatever you've already accomplished. And I mean, if you're laying on a deathbed, do you really want to look back and think, geez, I spent literally years in front of my TV, you know, when I could have been doing something else? And it's very humbling, I think, to understand that, you know, no matter how important we think we are, or as individuals, or all the things we've accomplished, you never know. You never know when the time will come. I've people that I went to high school with. There was a gentleman just recently, I think last month, he passed away pretty unexpectedly, and I mean, it could happen to anybody. So I feel that we need to not be so scared of Memento Mori. I feel that it's very powerful, and I feel that it motivates us as individuals to go out and accomplish things and apply the lessons of Freemasonry to our lives, because these lessons, they have actual, they're not just some random things that some people came up with. These are tried and true lessons that, if you apply to yourself, will make you a better person, and inadvertently, I'll just say it, they'll bring you prosperity, because as you work on yourself, your life improves. As you become a better person, things get better for you, and you shouldn't put things off till tomorrow, because tomorrow might not be here.
So leave a legacy, make yourself a better person, and make the world a better place by doing
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So, Justin, is there anything that we haven't covered that you would like to talk about before we close?
No, I don't believe so. I feel we covered I feel we covered quite a bit of good content. I just want to tell everybody, you know, I anybody can do this. Everybody has good ideas, and I know there's probably going to be some young brother that will watch this eventually, and he'll, you know, I know when I watched you and Rip Moore, I was like, man, you know, you got two giants right there on the screen, and you know, I'm very humbled to be sharing the same screen with you that you shared with, like, Rip Moore and Brother Nagy, and so it's very humbling. But any brother can do this. You know, if you have ideas out there, all it takes, I mean, it's very scary, I know, but just do it. Because like we just talked about Memento Mori, you might not have tomorrow. Create your legacy. Just go forth and share it. You have so many mediums now. This is a very unique time in mankind, Fred, because we can share ideas with people, you know, millions of people, if it's the right idea. And this is how we change the fraternity. And I'm not talking about innovations here. I'm talking about improving our practices. This is how it has to happen. This is how it's going to happen, because and when there's so little education going on, it's almost like a grassroots effort. And this is where it is right here. This is the grassroots effort to improve our lodge and our fraternity and our grand lodges. It's happening right now through these mediums, through blogs, through YouTube, podcast. And so just do it, guys. Just do it. I mean, I'm just a random guy. I'm just a random Mason. I'm no more of an expert than anybody else. I'm just sharing what's on my heart. And we all have something on our heart. And we all have, if you're watching this right now, we all have a way we can do it.
The man is Brother Justin Jones. The blog is a Masonic Improvement. The YouTube is Masonic Improvement. The Facebook page is Masonic Improvement. Thank you, Brother Justin Jones, for being here with me today to discuss Freemasonry.
Thank you so much, Fred. I really appreciate this opportunity. I've been so excited about this, and I look forward to hopefully having another talk with you someday in the future. This has been wonderful.
Well, that's all for now. This is Frederick L. Milliken, parting on the square. Pots.